Hello, folks. It's me again, Amanda Enderman, your trusty tour guide in the wonders of the wonderful city, also known as Rio de Janeiro. So, folks, sorry. Folks, on this video, I'm gonna continue talking about the theme of the previous video, which was praying in Rio. As I said in the previous video, that this theme is a theme that well, no, we normally talk about. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to religion. Am I right? So because of that, this video is gonna have part one and part two. I've already uploaded, in fact, part one. If you guys would like to watch that first, but this video is basically part two of it. And in case you're new to this channel, if you've just arrived here and you're wondering what is all this, what is part two, part one, and whatnot, so if that's the case, I highly recommend that you watch the introductory video of the channel, which is entitled "Nice to Meet You All," so that you can know what this channel is about, what I'm doing here, and all of that, who I am, and all of that. So on this video, I'm going to continue talking about what religion and religious worship was like in colonial Rio. An emphasis on that. I'm not talking about religious worship in Rio nowadays or any other place in the world. I'm talking about colonial Rio, which means basically from the 1500s until roughly the 1700s. All right? And roughly, no, I would say basically that from the 1500s until the 1700s. So we've already discussed a lot about that in part one. So in part one, I talked basically about the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church established itself, the divisions of it, and all of that. And now we are going to talk about the other people, meaning the groups which were persecuted by the Catholic Church at this time. Okay, because let's face it, back in colonial Rio, unless you were a Roman Catholic, pardon my French, you were screwed. All right, and even if you were a Roman Catholic, as I said in the previous video, you could be screwed as well. so uh, so so then we are going to talk about the other people. All right, the ones who had to pray not to be persecuted by the not to suffer persecution from the Catholic Church. All right, so who shall we start with? Not persecuting, of course. Don't intend to ever persecute anyone, far be it from me. But who do we start talking about? Well, I would say it's a good place to start by talking about the indigenous, of course. After all, they were the very first people who were here, even before the European settlers came along, and even the church for that matter. So. The indigenous, they presented quite an issue for the church of the time. You see, because as I said in the previous video, the purpose of the Catholic Church with the colonization of the New World was to ensure that heresies would not take root in the New World, and so as not to lose their power, of course. So, so that's why, in fact, they backed the expeditions to the New World. So of course it was a great culture shock, and I have mentioned that in previous videos. So it was a great culture shock when the Portuguese or the Europeans met the indigenous in a number of reasons, but mainly some religious practices of some religious practices that were practiced by the indigenous. They absolutely stroke fear and repulse and all bad things that you can think of in the hearts of the Catholics or the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church absolutely abhorred those practices. And what were those practices? Well, one of them was polygamy. It was not a thing that was, it was not a custom that was practiced in all religious tribes in the Americas. Of course, I always like to make it quite clear that unlike other countries such as Argentina or Paraguay, where there was only one religious tribe in what is the whole country nowadays, in Brazil there were a plethora of them. So there were hundreds of different indigenous customs, to say the least. So some tribes practice polygamy, which means for a man to have lots of to have more than one wife at the same time, and others didn't. While others didn't, but those who did, the Catholic Church did not like it, of course, because the of course the Christian and Catholic tradition is for there to be monogamy, and anything outside of monogamy would be adultery, which at the time was considered a mortal sin, like basically everything else. basically basically a lot of things were considered mortal sins, but among them adultery. Okay. Another practice which was considered even worse by the Catholic Church was cannibalism. And the Catholic Church, that was one that they could never understand it for they could never understand for the life of them why the indigenous practiced it, because they thought, whoa, why are they doing that? They have all the food they can get. They know where to get food. They're not lacking food. So why would they eat other humans? But what they never understood was that it was actually a religious practice for the indigenous. For a lot of indigenous tribes, it was about absorbing the qualities, the virtues of your enemy, because normally cannibalism was practiced only with enemies in as a result of fights. The losers would be eaten by the winners. So and this was because the winners, they wanted to absorb the virtues of their enemies, quite literally. You know, and of course a lot of Europeans ended up actually being the victims of cannibalism by the indigenous. So this was a practice that, uh, for very good reason, struck fear into the hearts of the Europeans, and also naturally the belief in the practice of polytheism, which is the belief in a number of different gods. But you see, with the gods of the indigenous, you have to keep in mind that they weren't often they weren't personified gods. They did not have a human form, such as, for instance, the Roman gods or the Greek gods. No, a lot of times they were symbolized by things of nature itself. So the tree was the god, the mountain was the god. So one very prominent example of this is Pachamama for the Incas. Pachamama was represented by the Andes themselves. So the Andes to the Incas, they were Pachamama. There wasn't a woman which was, she is the human form of Pachamama. No. All right. So, but the thing is that with the indigenous, the church ended up adopting the strategy not of persecution or forced conversion, but they adopted the strategy of conversion through education, because the order, the religious order who tackled the who took care, who tackled, no, I should say took care, who took care of the indigenous issue were the Jesuits. And the Jesuits, they had the principle of converting people by educating them. And of course, they were very much in favor of the Counter Reformation, as well. So, of course, the order was created in 1534 and then promptly recognized by Pope Paul III in 1540. So they were very much helpers of the Counter Reformation at this time. And in fact, the Jesuits were the ones that paved the way so that the indigenous would not be enslaved. But then of course, Portugal just substituted indigenous for Africans. And I will do, yes, a video speaking about slavery in Brazil in the future, but that's for the future. Now we're talking about religion. All right. So basically, the strategy with the indigenous was education, educating them about the Catholic faith. And a lot of the times they used syncretism. So they would take, I don't know, the main god of the indigenous, which rules the heavens and clouds and storms and such, and they would say, "Oh, look, this is the only god, that we are telling you." So so they would do that, basically, you know just as they did, by the way, with the pagan gods, when Constantine decreed that that Christianism would be the religion in Rome. And I mentioned that in part one as well. So next up, sorry, I am following my notes this time. So next up we have the gypsies. So the gypsies, they were already being persecuted in Europe ever since the 15th century, meaning the 1400s. And this was mainly because, well, the gypsies, first of all, they were very fun-loving people. Wherever they went, it was like the circus coming to town. Wherever they stopped with their caravans and their tents, it was literally the circus coming to town. They would have parties at open squares, with music and dancing, and of course, as I said in part one, laughter was seen as an invitation to lust. So once again, big no-no with the Catholic Church. And another big no-no practiced by the gypsies was certain practices, okay, that they had, such as using oracles, using cards, and palm reading, and all things of the sort to tell people's fortunes. That was a really big no-no. And on top of that, there was the fact that they were nomads. This was also not acceptable by the church. So in fact, there was a law. In fact, this practice of them being nomads even became forbidden at a certain point. They made a law that forbade the gypsies to roam around. They had to settle down where they were. So it was really they were really marginalized in society because of that. uh, you know um, and some of these gypsies managed to migrate, or emigrate, I should say, to the Americas. And of course, when they came to the Americas, basically it was business as usual in terms of being outcasts, being marginalized, and even being persecuted. A lot of gypsy women, because of these customs of reading cards, or our very well-known tarot cards nowadays, or reading people's poems, a lot of them were even burned at the stake because of that, being accused of witchcraft. uh, you know so, but of course, and also, because as I said before, what the Catholic Church was after were baptized people, were Catholics who were practicing things that were outside the norm. This is who they were after. So, because the gypsies, wherever they passed, they absorbed a little bit of the local culture. So the way they absorbed the Christian culture was by adoring Saint Sarah Kali, which was the servant of Mary Magdalene. And to this day, Saint Sarah Kali is the patron saint of gypsies to this day. So then, in the eyes of the Roman Catholic Church, this was like, oh, they are worshiping a saint, so they can't do these other things that are against our rules, that sort of thing. So next up, of course, we cannot forget the Jews. And well, when it comes to Jews, well, let's just say that persecuting Jews or blaming Jews for whatever you can possibly think of, or trying to enslave Jews, trying to exterminate Jews, is not a new idea. And even in the 1500s already, it was not a new idea. Just so you can have an idea, and it is important to say that because surprisingly enough, a lot of people think that the only persecution that the Jews ever suffered was the Holocaust. Jews have been persecuted and almost been exterminated and been enslaved and all of that, basically repetitively, ever since ancient Egypt. Yes. And this is also another thing. People nowadays, when they think of slaves, they and I will address that in the video about slavery, of course, but so tiny spoiler. So when people think of slaves, they normally think of African slaves. And I'm not saying Africans were never enslaved, of course they were, but a lot of people don't realize that Jews were already enslaved in ancient Egypt and also in Babylon shortly after that. So if we're gonna talk about persecuted peoples, you have to talk about them, of course. And by the way, it may be a shocker to you as well, and it sure was to me when I found out. But just last year, I found out that when we're talking about Jewish people, this happens to include yours truly. Go figure. I never thought that I of all people, at least ethnically, would be Jewish. I never thought of that. In fact, I've never even set foot in a synagogue my whole life. My family, at least on my mom's side, which is the Jewish side, specifically a side of Sephardic Jews, not Ashkenazi Jews, of course. Uh, the surname is Jibahus. All right. But anyways, so but anyways, my mom's whole family, as far as I knew it, was Catholic. So when I discovered that originally they were Jews who converted because in order not to be persecuted, and that's how Catholicism took root in my family, I was like, oh, what? And it was a shock, a surprise, all these things combined. In fact, there was one time which I had a group of Israeli tourists, and I had just discovered this. So I told them that when I found out, my reaction was, "Oh my God, Jesus Christ is there!" When I was looking at the list, and then one of them went like, "Wait a minute, you discovered that you're Jewish?" And you go, Jesus Christ is there? No, 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 no. You should have said, Oy vey, it's there. Oh, oh boy. So very fun people, by the way. So, anyways, so speaking about the Jewish situation already, and mind you, I am talking about in the 1500s, and specifically in this case, in the Iberian Peninsula, because of course we are talking about colonial Rio, which was in Brazil, which was a colony of Portugal. So what happened then? Well, At this time, there were Jews living peacefully, you know, normally, both in Portugal and in Spain. All right, and this was during the reign of Isabella the First, or Isabella la Católica, which was married to King Ferdinand of Aragon. So with their marriage, the kingdoms of Castile and Leon became one. And also, but also, ever since they first started their reign together, they were determined to unite all of Spain, because at this time the Moors, they were which were Muslims, so they were advancing the Islamic Empire into Europe, and they managed to get as far as the Asturias, which is in the north of Spain. So in their reign, they were determined to expel the Moors, all right, which, as I said, were Muslim, and basically take back the lands which originally belonged to Spain, and unite all kingdoms there were four separate kingdoms at this time, which was Castile, Leon, Navarre, and Aragon, basically. Oh, and the Caliphate of Cordoba, which was, or Andalusia, which was the southernmost part of Spain. So they managed to reconquer these territories, these territories which used to be Spanish, and to expel the Moors as well. But they were not content with just expelling the Moors. No, no, no. They also wanted to unite Spain under one faith, which was, you guessed it, Catholicism, of course, because well, Queen Isabella was a very pious Catholic. Uh, so so of course, that's when it began to be a problem for the Jews. All right. So what Queen Isabella did was to tell the Jews that either you convert to Catholicism on your own, or you can no longer reside in Spain. You have to leave Spain. So a lot of Jews chose to convert, and still practice Judaism hidden, and those were the most persecuted ones, because of course, once they converted and were baptized, if they continued to practice the customs of Judaism, that was heresy, which was punishable by death. So these were the ones that were normally tortured and burned at the stake. All right, but a lot of these Jews that resided in Spain decided to move to Portugal, so that they wouldn't have to convert, so that in Portugal, where so far there was no such decree or no such persecution, they could practice their religion freely. And of course, with the King of Portugal, it was a whole different story. At this time, Portugal had already reconquered most of their lands that had been taken over by the Moors. They had already done that with the help of England, in fact. So they weren't concerned about expelling the Moors. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the only place in Portugal that the Moors, which the Moors were still occupying in Portugal, was the Algarve, you know. And the Portuguese were not so, determined as the Spaniards were. But what happened was that the King of Portugal, of all the women that he could have chosen to marry, he cast his eye on Queen Isabella of Spain's eldest daughter, which was also named Isabel. So, and of course, and well, this princess, this Spanish princess, she had already been married to a Portuguese king in the past, but this Portuguese king was killed uh, in 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 the midst of a battle or something. or if I'm not mistaken. So she was heartbroken by this because she really loved this first husband of hers. So she came back to Spain after, after being widowed, and she didn't want to know about marriage. She decided to spend the rest of her days in a nunnery, to basically become a nun, you know until she was summoned again, because another king of Portugal wanted to marry her. So, and both Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand thought that this was a very good idea, to to re-cement the alliance between Portugal and Spain, which they were looking after. So she, after much insisting, she accepted with one condition: that also in Portugal the Jews would be expelled, because of course in the nunnery she had the belief had grown within her that the reason why her first husband had died was because there were heretics in the kingdom of Portugal. Okay, so the king of Portugal, so then the king of Portugal, on the other hand, wasn't quite a conundrum, because he didn't want to expel the Jews, because unlike the Spanish monarchs, who didn't even care about that and suffered greatly because of it. He knew that the Jews are naturally very good with money, with making money, with enriching a country, literally enriching with money. So he didn't want to expel them. But on the other hand, he wanted to marry Isabel, the daughter of the kings of Spain. And she was demanding that. So he decided to do a political maneuver. So he decreed it that the same thing that took place in Portugal would take that took that sorry that took place in Spain would take place in Portugal. So the Jews would either convert or they could leave Portugal. But unlike Spain, that simply told them to leave and you make do, you go wherever you can. And in fact, a lot of Jews, and in fact, I forgot to mention, a lot of Jews, when they left both Spain and Portugal, they decided not to flee to the Americas, but to the Netherlands, of all places. Of all places, because, well, and let me tell you that the Netherlands were very forward thinking already at this time. While everyone in Europe was persecuting Jews, they basically said, "Well, come here, we don't mind," you know. Gotta hand it to them. Gotta hand it to those Dutch for accepting Jews. Come here, come here. They don't want you there. Bring your money over here. Now that's my kind of thinking too. So, anyways, though of course later there was nothing that could be done, for obvious reasons, but we are still in the 1500s. So back to the 1500s. So a lot of Jews decided that they would go to the Americas, the colonies, the Portuguese colonies. So the king, he decided to do the following, to stay on their good side. Okay, so and be able to keep the money, in a way. So and a lot of people took advantage of the Jews at this time, let it be known, because they were desperate to leave, because they had to leave by a certain date. So they were selling all that they could sell, because you could only take so much into a ship. So people were greatly exploiting them, because of that. So the thing is, so basically so what the king proposed to them was the following: no worries here. Instead of just telling you to leave and you have to make do, the Portuguese government is going to help you if you pay a certain amount as a fee. We will provide ships to take you to the Americas or to the Netherlands, or to wherever you want to go. In fact, we'll have multiple ships for that. And the ships will be available on a certain date. And he gave the certain date to them. So on that certain date, those of you who want to leave, you have to be at the port, because from the next day, from that date, Judaism is will no longer be allowed here. If you stay, you will have to convert. All right. So basically, all the Jews in Portugal were there at the port. But guess what? There were no ships waiting for them. Instead, there were several priests with holy water, and they sprinkled holy water on all of them, and they did a lot of forced baptisms, literally with swords in their necks, like, you'll be baptized now. So they decreed that, well, now you are all Catholic. And well, a lot of them did eventually manage to go to the New World, and a lot of them also were sent to the Americas in the early 1500s as punishment. Back then it was considered a punishment because they thought that no one would survive over here. But of course, once the Jews came here and basically built Brazil from scratch, turned Brazil into developed cities and what have you, then it was then that the Portuguese started, hey, we have to settle that. So there is gains to be made from that after all. Well, big. Well. So what else is new, right? Yeah, okay. So if those Jews succeeded there, so now we're gonna go. Now that it is possible to survive there. So using the Jews as guinea pigs. So what else is new? Am I right? What else is new? So our next persecuted minority were are is not the correct verb tense. I have to say were, gladly. Gladly, it's a past tense. Were the slaves, all right? And the reason why, and quite frankly, I don't like using the word minority, especially when it comes to slaves, because quite frankly, back in colonial Rio, the slaves were, at least numerically, they were the majority. There were far more slaves than there were slave owners. So in fact, at least numerically, they were far from being a minority in terms of there being more owners than there were slaves. It was quite the opposite, in fact. Well, I'm giving several spoilers about the slavery video already. Hope that piques your interest, the interest of all of you. So, with the slaves, what happened was that, you see, in Africa, a lot of them worshipped a pantheon of gods as well, which nowadays they are called orishas, or in Spanish, orishas. In Spanish, they put the accent in Spanish they put the accent in the I, whereas in Portuguese the tonic syllable is the A. So in Portuguese we say orixás, but they are still very well known and revered to this day. For instance, in Brazilian New Year's Eve, the reason why everyone wears white traditionally is in honor of one of the African goddesses, which is the goddess of the sea, which is Iemanjá. Her color is white. You know. But what happened was that, of course, in colonial times, the slaves were forbidden to worship their gods, because once they were enslaved, already in Africa, they were given Christian names. So then, for all intents and purposes, they were Christian. So if they were caught worshiping African deities, that was heresy. They're quite a clever way, right? So of course the slaves got around this by firstly syncretizing their gods with Catholic saints. So this is why, if you're ever in Brazil, you will see that syncretism. Sorry. Oh boy, I choked. So, which exists to this day. All right. For instance, Oshun is Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, Ogun, the god of the African Orisha, which is a warrior. He is syncretized with Saint George, um, and Iemanjá is Our Lady of the Sailors, or Our Lady of Gloria, and so on. All right, so they would both do that, and because with time the church basically thought, oh, so look, they're assimilating, they're worshiping saints, so we succeeded. So then they got further around it by building churches for for them to be able to worship, because you see, the slaves, they were also not allowed to go into the traditional churches. They were not allowed to attend mass with the slave owners also, so they built churches of their own. And also a very common misconception in in Brazil is to say that, oh, the churches that were built by slaves were the ones that only have one bell tower. No, no, not so. The ones that have only one bell tower, it was a way of people not being required to pay taxes by Portugal. It was another story. But what you see in the churches that were built by slaves and for them to worship is that the saints, they look a lot like the African deities, or they have subtle symbols in their images that relate to the African deities. So for example, if it were the case of Oshun, all right, Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, so it's very likely that in a church built by the slaves, her clothes will be yellow, or the clothes that are directly on her back, not her veil. Obviously, her veil is traditionally blue, so if her veil were yellow, this would be too much of a giveaway. But normally, instead of her robe being white, it would be yellow, to symbol, because yellow is the color of Oshun, and also perhaps she would be there would be either around her, or she would be on a waterfall, or a lake, because this is also the domain of Oshun, waterfalls and lakes. So there you go. Or if it were Iemanjá, which is Our Lady of Gloria, there would be some reference to the ocean or creatures of the ocean, but very subtly placed, in kind of like a hiding in plain sight sort of thing. All right, so you have to really know that the symbols are there in order to find them, and that was the idea, of course. Otherwise, if they were caught worshiping the African deities, you guessed it, burning at the stake. All right. And speaking of burning at the stakes, I can't possibly do this video without talking about the pagans. So, regarding the pagans, well, there are a lot of misconceptions about pagans which unfortunately persist to this day. One of them is that being pagan is the same as being atheist. No, not at all. And the other of them is that if you were baptized ever in your life, then you're not a pagan. Nope, not so. So even the word pagan, by the way, was a word attributed by the church to the people already in Europe who refused to accept the one true God of the Catholic Church, and still worshipped many gods. For instance, in the Roman Empire, these would be the people who still kept worshiping Jupiter, or Mercury, or Venus, or so on. Or even the barbaric tribes who had their own gods, such as the Celts, the Germanics, or better yet, the Germanic, no, the Saxons, the Norse, all of those. So they were considered pagans and also charged with witchcraft, by the way, because of their religious rituals and stuff, which would be things such as making potions and especially women making potions, because you see in the pagan culture, especially in the Celtic cultures, the elderly women, they were revered as wise women. They would be the healers of their community. But once the Catholic Church came along, they were simply branded as witches, all right, or witch doctors or something like that, because in the view of the Catholic Church, these women were taking over were taking over life and healing, which was the privilege of God. And there and so the Catholic Church, they built the first universities in Europe where only men could attend, and only those people were legitimate healers. So therefore, any woman who knew herbs that could heal, or even midwives who knew herbs and oils, essentially, that would diminish the pains of labor. They were some of the most persecuted, because it says in the Bible that since Eve was weak, women have the most pain possible during childbirth. That was the conception back then. So that was the norm back then. So, oh my goodness, glad we don't have none of that nowadays anymore, right? Glad nowadays we can just have C-sections if we so choose. Am I right? Thank goodness for that. So, and last but definitely not least, were the Protestants. So I have already discussed about the Protestants in previous videos, such as the video about the foundation of Rio. So the Protestants, they were the ones that came here, that are worthy of mention, were basically the Dutch, which tried to form a colony in the Northeast with Maurice of Nassau. And already at this time, I believe the Netherlands were a predominantly Protestant country or kingdom. So basically, the Dutch who came here and tried to settle in the Northeast, and who later were expelled by the Portuguese, they were Protestants, if I'm not mistaken. But specifically in Rio, though, there were the Calvinists, which came here with Villegagnon, trying to form the Antarctic France. But also there were other Protestants who came here, of course, escaping persecution, and who lived, of course, pretty much like the Jews, pretending to worship, pretending to worship like Catholics, but really they were worshiping like Protestants. All right. Though the Protestants here, they were not very predominant, because, well, as I said before, the predominant religion in Brazil, way until the 1800s, and basically to this day, no, basically not to this day. To this day, Protestantism is also very prominent here in Brazil. But I would say in terms of the religion of the majority in Brazil, it's a close tie between Protestantism, various types, and Catholicism. So folks, this is it for the theme, the part 2 of praying in Rio, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh, by the way, I let's see if you can guess the theme of the next video. And the hint is, it is a thing, right? It's a thing which is said to make the world go round. Okay? So stay tuned, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye!